Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we discuss causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Will Klusovski. He's an accomplished security professional and chief security architect for Avertium. Will, welcome.
Hey, Pete. Glad to be here. Excited to have this little chat.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on. Will, could you give our audience a little background on yourself, and especially as it comes to hiring, recruiting, some of your backgrounds, job titles, things that you've done?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I've been in the cybersecurity technology space for 20 plus years, 23, 24, something like that now. I've spent most of that time in security consulting and managed service organizations. So in that time, I've kind of held most roles that exist in there. So I've worked in product management, delivery teams, pre-sales, general delivery stuff. I've built several organizations, so new technology comes out or new security offering comes out, help build those solutions, which obviously requires, the need to staff those up and upskill people as well. And I've built built within those organizations, other teams. And then I've actually advised too on the, sort of as an individual, advise some companies as well on sort of how to do growth and work towards, dealing with some of these challenges that we sort of see in this talent gap issue that we have, right?
Cool. So how do you see the talent gap? Is it real? Is it imaginary? And what does it look like if it is real?
Yeah, I think so. It's there, right? It exists. and I think that's some of the problem is, we've built up, we got ourselves in this situation, I think is kind of how it came to with the back in the day, security wasn't a job for entry level people, right? It was something that a skilled IT person would transition into, or somebody, would start to take on before security roles kind of were ingrained in part of I worked in organizations decades ago that didn't have security teams, right? It sort of became this product of IT. And since we've evolved into that, now we've gotten to a place where, we need entry-level people, but we didn't necessarily have the process to build them and bring them in and do that. And then we have all of those experienced people continuing to be more experienced and moving on to other places. And so that's kind of where we had the gap. I think, we've gotten to the situation where we have a need, and the only way to fill that need is to get trained people. But those trained people aren't always out there. So organizations tend to be looking for that experienced person, but not necessarily hiring inexperienced people and entry-level people and building that, what I call farm system up, so that we can all sort of take advantage of that.
Yeah, for sure. That's the biggest thing that I think we're lacking as an industry. And it's been lacking ever since I think security has been a field itself, really. Like you said, it kind of grew out of IT, and still somehow it's not a mature industry. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't have formalized paths for people to come up in. The challenge most companies see, I think, is that, how do we justify hiring somebody entry level when it's going to take years to train this person up to where they need to be to contribute at the level we need them to contribute at for our security organization, especially for internal security teams, and, versus managed security services, for instance, where you can say, okay, well, at least this person's going to be profit generating. That's not the case for an internal security team with a corporation somewhere. So I think, we're kind of behind the 8 ball right now. And I think it's only going to get worse as the Gen Xers start to retire after the boomers, and all the people that, like yourself, that came up in security before it was a field. All the OGs are going to be gone, and there's not enough succession planning happening and not enough people coming through the pipeline to backfill those. So obviously it's a pretty big problem. It's pretty,
for sure.
So for anybody listening, I guess, what are some ways that, within somebody's own organization, they can kind of justify hiring at the entry level or building some of these people that we need?
Yeah, I think that's the largest challenge that we have right now is how do we get those entry level people? And I'll kind of go back to what, like you mentioned, part of the other issue too is I think security professionals don't understand how big the industry is, right? So especially those coming out I talk to a lot of people who say I want to be in cybersecurity, and I'm like, okay, where do you want to work, right? I've advised younger folks looking to do it. I'm like, everybody knows about the pen testing and hacking stuff, and they think that's really cool, but they don't understand that even within there's multiple facets and different skill sets. A lot of them don't even know GRC is even a thing, right? Until they get to a certain point. So I think for them, kind of making themselves really broad and aware of what potentially is out there can help those on that side. To answer your question more directly, what can organizations do to justify that hiring? I think it's similar to any other position. They have to probably need to scale roles to fit that type of capability, right? I'm pretty sure that a lot of organizations' security staff are doing things well below their skill level, right? And then we see this probably take a page out of the HR book, right? Which is how long does it take to hire somebody, and what does that cost us? And all of that. Hey, if we lose this person, there's all these metrics around just being able to get somebody on board regardless of what their skill set is or where they work. If we take that same kind of metric and then apply it to, hey, if we take this person who's ready right now and put them in place, and yeah, we have to train them, but that's probably going to save you money over trying to find that right perfect unicorn over the long run. And then you've got somebody who you can train and invest in, internally to your organization. I think that's one way to go about it.
For sure. Yeah. So kind of what I'm hearing is get specific about the money of it, figure out what your typical time to fill is going to be for a given senior security job. A lot of jobs I'll see posted out there, they'll have, 10 applicants. Well, or they'll have a ton of applicants, but nobody's a fit, and they're still posted 6-9 months later. It's like, okay, well, that's a really long time. What if you hired somebody a little bit more junior in the beginning, got them ramped up in a few months, then you're actually ahead of the game than if you waited 9 or 12 months to hire that perfect, senior unicorn person. So being as specific as you can, I guess, as a hiring team about what skills do somebody absolutely need to have on day one, and then beyond that, what can we train and how long it's going to take to train somebody. Just map everything out. I think not enough teams probably think about these things in tangible terms or in money terms, especially to justify new hires to the business when, security is a cost function, as they say, outside of the consulting world. And I think it's easier to justify in the consulting world than MSSPs because, again, those folks are going to be profit generating. So if you've managed to build a training program where you're getting multiple people through there, call it every semester, you're saving a bunch of money versus going out to the market and having to overpay for people that everybody else is trying to hire. It's about, I think, adding capacity to the overall talent pool versus just poaching people from other companies, which is a zero-sum game, and basically everybody loses because whatever new hire you make, it's somebody else's backfill. And we're all kind of in the same boat in the security industry. We're defenders. We're trying to we're against the bad guys. Let's stop being so poaching people and adversarial and stuff within the community. And the best way to do that is grow more people. But could you think, I guess, of some metrics that would be, or tangible numbers that would be important for you as a hiring manager in justifying building a training program or in hiring experienced people?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. From the consulting side, it's easier for us because we know what pipeline's coming in and we can predict when we need to hire and have training programs, and we sort of have levers that we can pull in place to kind of get somebody trained and up to speed. And I think going back to what you said about the job descriptions and knowing what's capable, I think that's how that's kind of the metrics I would look at for, an organization who needs internal security staff and they want to justify having an entry level person. You've probably got staff who are doing the job of 2 or 3 or more people, right? If that person leaves, you're not going to find one person to replace them usually, right? When they've kind of taken on more than they should be. So I think taking a look at that person's job description that's going on today and taking those lower level functions out and creating basically an entry level position, saying, hey, Bob over here is really senior, but he's doing all of these kind of junior activities. And spread that across 3 or 4 other people. We can take all of this off of them, hire somebody, teach them how to do that. That frees, these more senior resources who cost more. We get more value out of them. You get the benefit of those teams not having to do sort of the mundane work. And then you get to build up entry level skills that transition. It's kind of the same thing as the managed services model where you don't worry about hiring all the people for the SOC because that's a pain in the butt. You just contract out and let it be done. Sort of take that same approach with your entry level staff. Take away the more mundane things that are going to be interesting to them and not interesting to your senior people.
That's cool. And then benefit of that too, in mapping out all those responsibilities is all of a sudden you have a repository of skills for your organization that, like you said, if somebody ever does leave, then you can have kind of a succession plan. Okay, this is what we need their replacement to have. And you start to build a profile for each position and the responsibilities that they have, so you can more formalize the job titles and the responsibilities that people have. So I love that idea where you form a list of responsibilities for that one person, then split out the ones that don't make sense for them to have. And then, if you need to hire that person again, maybe consider somebody at the mid-level versus the senior level to fill that role. And then for the same salary for that mid-level person and that junior person, it would add up to what you'd pay a senior person. And then you have the more senior of the two not doing all the grunt work. So
exactly. Yeah. And then you get career, you get sort of like, I think some organizations may do this, others probably don't, but how often do you go back and look at the roles you have and if they're still applicable and matched to the technology versus just kind of being like, hey, give Jenny this to do and keep throwing stuff on her plate until she can't handle it, right? So kind of taking that step back of just, having better staffing model for your organization. And then your entry level people have, now that you're bringing those entry level people in, everybody's always afraid, oh, well, we're going to train them and they're going to leave. Well, if you train them and then you have a path and you can show them, hey, this is where you're going to go and this is how you're going to fill, this is why you're doing these things and this is why it's exciting, then they won't leave, right? You keep giving them more exciting things to do. I think that's one of the, kind of go off on a tangent here, that's one of the other risks we had, because you mentioned if all we're doing is hiring the same people back and forth through all these different companies, that's not helping anybody. And, one of the biggest challenges we have today with the gap is most people have a need for a certain type of role, and they just are looking for somebody to fill that role who's already doing it. Right. And so if they're like, hey, Will, you're doing a great job over there. We want you to come over here and do the exact same thing. There's no incentive to do that other than money, and money's only going to go so far. So organizations need to go, hey, you're doing a great job over there. We want you to do some of that here, and then we want you to challenge yourself and extend yourself and do a few more things here. And I think you can, again, entry levels, tough to begin with, but even those folks with less than 5 years of experience, that's really valuable for them. If you want to, you got to give them, I don't want to say the carrot on the stick, but you offer them something more than just kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, money is so fleeting, and I've discovered in recruiting for so many years in this field, if somebody's only motivator is money, they're going to be gone in 6 to 12 months because somebody's always paying more.
Exactly. Yeah, there's I spent a lot of time working with an industry specific focus, and financial services, to nobody's surprise, is not always the greatest place to work. They kind of have some antiquated things. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of hours put in and things like that, and really stressful. And I kind of talked to one of the analysts about how they do that. How do they manage to keep people in the industry? And they're like, they just throw more money at them. So it's tough, but they're going to burn out eventually.
Yeah, especially in the consulting world, the fact that you mentioned you're really looking to offer somebody responsibilities or some sort of step up when they're making a move, that's so crucial. Sometimes I'll talk to a potential client and they'll be like, "Yeah, we need to hire this exact person doing this exact job at a direct competitor." And it's like, okay, but what are you offering? Are your benefits package, is that better? Or is your salary better? Is your job title better? Like, why would this person actually make the switch if it's the exact same job doing, at a similar firm? You really have to stand out somehow, especially for those mid and senior level people. They're not, they're pretty happy where they're at most of the time. They're not just going to jump for no reason. So you have to have some good tangible reasons. And I love to do that, is to, find somebody that's maybe underappreciated in their current role, that has been looking for an opportunity to do more, to get more responsibility, and offer them either a promotion or a clear path to a promotion, or a clear path to just more interesting work. So many people I talk to, they're just bored, or they feel like their manager won't listen to them. They have all these great ideas to improve process or technology, and they're just kind of a cog in a wheel. So that's another point that I've talked about with other guests, is just listening to people. That helps retention, and it helps you understand what motivates people when you're looking to hire that new person too.
Yeah, that middle part of the diamond, so to speak, like you've got your executives and your entry level, that middle part of the diamond is so important. And you're absolutely right. Most people I've talked to in that space, whether, I'm looking to hire or just helping people, find a role, it's usually that. It's, I can't, nobody's listening to me. I can't make an impact. I'm just coming to work and, being, doing this one thing, and that's it, not getting challenged, or, there's no opportunity for promotion. I don't have, I'm not doing what I want to do. I mean, all of those things from a retention standpoint are easily fixed, because both of us and most people working at all those companies, many of those companies would say, there's plenty of other things that you could be doing that are still valuable, right, to the company. And if their management's not listening to it, somebody else as well.
Mm-hmm. Or even like cross training people within the company to do other things. Like if somebody has really good communication skills and they're a security engineer, maybe teach them pre-sales, get them involved with customers as an MSSP, or security products company, or there's just so many different ways that you can motivate people that don't cost a lot of money, that are good for both them and you. You just got to think about it and be close enough to the employees to know when something's wrong, having emotional intelligence, or if nothing's wrong, getting ahead of any potential problems, realizing undercurrents. If there's some big changes coming down from the top, realize that might shake things up, and you might need to kind of talk to your team about it and see where their head's at. So yeah, that's
and that trend. I'm a big fan of taking, transitioning people from one industry to the other, and especially if you can do it inside your own company, right? If you can take that person who's, working in change management or, some other department, and they have an interest in security, and they've, taken some certs or learning some things, and transition them over, get that benefit. You're already paying for that person to be there anyway, and they're a lot of times they're raising their hand to volunteer to get that opportunity. That's a win-win for everybody, and then that helps with your retention, because eventually that person, if they want to be in cybersecurity and you're not giving them that opportunity, they're going to find it and leave. So, and then you're going to be, you're going to miss out on a potential new role you could have had, and you're going to lose whatever it was they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the old statistic is that it costs 6 months of somebody's salary to replace them. I would argue, especially in security, that's probably low. It's a specialized field. There's a lot of training required, even for experienced people, to get them up to speed with your environment or your processes. It's still going to take some time before they're, 100% contribution. So retention is such a big piece of that. So everybody talks about the talent gap as far as hiring is concerned, but you can solve a lot of your own problems as an organization just by holding on to the people that you have. They say it's much easier to retain a customer than to recruit a new one. In marketing terms, it's the same way for staff too.
And that's it. It's a great point that you look at you mentioned something that made me think of the ability to learn, to understand, right? To me, that's always more important. You can teach somebody a UI for a different, security technology, whatever it is, that's fine. Understanding how that technology works or understanding how to learn is more important. And I think it's important, kind of going back to that job description. And when we think about, all right, if I need to hire somebody to do this, what does that actually mean? And then, look into yourself as a hiring manager or as a company, and go, how many times do I just Google something and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I figured it out. Right. And how much of your education, your training, whatever goes into you being able to solve that one problem you had to figure out versus just being able to kind of learn. Right. So that's kind of where you talk about hire for capability, hire for ability, not necessarily experience.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. How do you assess that? How do you know if somebody has that ability to Google or to be resourceful and, without demanding extra budget for new tools or whatever,
Sure.
actually figure something out? How do you know if somebody's going to be able to do that?
So one of the most important criteria I've always used for hiring, especially because you mentioned pre-sales, which is an important area where you kind of have to do that all the time, is your critical thinking skills and your ability to do problem solving. And really, a lot of times through the interview process, really just ask for examples of how they've done that in the past or how they would do that. And I've coached people as well, because, it's very typical. You get in an interview for somebody to say, tell me about a time when blah, 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 blah. And I would say, if they ask you that question and you don't have an example, then you tell them what you would do in that situation, right? Tell them how you would use, okay, I have this knowledge and this capability and this background, and you're telling me this, so I would break it down this way, and here's how I would figure that out, right? So I think it's really about, it's kind of that story time, right? How would you figure that out? It's not taking a test, it's not, doing math problems, but an individual's ability to break down a problem and kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of what the solution is without knowing exactly, maybe how that works just specifically or anything like that. They don't have to know the minutia of the technology, but if they can intelligently explain the situation and say, oh, here's how I think about it, I think you can get a really good read on them.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, you're assessing a couple of things there. You're assessing, or a few things. You're assessing how they're thinking on their feet. You're assessing their thought process and, how, I don't know, what's the word, analytical they are. You're also assessing communication skills, all those things just by asking questions about how they would work through a problem. It reminds me of back when I was recruiting for DFIR all the time. I'd worked with a lot of DFIR consultancies. And one of the things they always said they were looking for is investigative mindset. I really never knew what that was. And I would ask hiring managers like, hey, can you give me like a question to ask these people to assess investigative mindset? Because they get people going into the interview process and they looked great on paper. They presented well to me, but then they wouldn't get the job because they, quote unquote, did not have the investigative mindset. So I think that's kind of a good example of that. You're looking more for thought process and approach versus a set of technologies that somebody knows. And that's right. A great way to expand your talent pool too. There's a bunch of roles that I've worked on where they were asking for a specific technology stack for somebody to have known. But there's just so many SIMs out there, there's so many scanning tools. And, if somebody's learned one and they learned it quickly, they can probably learn another one. And if you're looking for a very specific technology stack and you have 10 or 15 hard requirements, there's probably only a handful of people with that list of skills in the entire United States, for instance. Yeah. So I've worked on jobs like that where there's only a handful of people. And I stress to the hiring managers, look, I've gone to the market. There's only 15 people in the entire country that have this list of skills. And we'll be real lucky if we get one of them. And if we do, you better hire them because that's going to be your only shot. But if you can broaden that candidate pool and all of a sudden you have, 500 people because you knocked off 2 requirements of 15, it's such a small thing, especially if you feel like it's something that can be taught. So I always recommend for hiring and job descriptions, have a small list of must-haves, really figure out what you absolutely need on day one, keep that small, and then you can have as many nice to haves as you want.
Yeah, for sure.
That's not going to restrict somebody from applying usually.
As somebody who used to, work with Microsoft a lot, Azure consultants from a security perspective are always in high demand. But If you come with a whole bunch of GCP or AWS skills, guess what? We'll take you. We'll teach you how the nuances and the differences of it. There's a difference between how, it's about how quickly you can hit the ground running, right? But if you're excited to move and make that move and you're open to that transition, it's a big opportunity for those individuals.
Yeah, and listen to your recruiters too, because sometimes there's a mismatch between the salary you're able to offer and your benefits package versus the skills that you're asking for. So if you're asking for, top of the industry skills from somebody, understand that you're probably going to need to pay top of the industry. And if not, you're going to have to make some concessions to actually get somebody on board without that role staying open for 12 months. And again, if you think about how much that's costing you, especially if you're an MSSP or a consulting firm, you can easily figure out, with as packed as their schedule would be, how much revenue are you losing out on because that person isn't on board? Or how much does your security posture suffer if you don't hire that security engineer for 6 or 9 months?
Yeah, what projects are not getting done right now because you haven't filled that gap for sure.
Yep. So you'd mentioned you've had some accomplishments as a hiring manager and guiding people through consulting firms and mentoring people and stuff like that. Could you describe some of your accomplishments?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think one of the things we talked about was sort of the most significant one, or the one that made me the happiest. I remember, again, kind of going back to building and developing a pre-sales team at an organization that didn't have one, right? And that's, I think it's germane to this conversation because that process for me involved, one, making the organization understand that these roles are needed, right? Being able to change the mindset of the organization from saying, oh, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to just, use our delivery consultants to also help the sales teams. And, so there's a lot of work through, building the process and proving the worth of it all. And then, so that, I would say for me, like, it was really exciting when I got that first hire who's like, your individual, that person, your job is to you're going to come in and you're going to work in the pre-sales team, and that's all you're going to do. Like, that's what you're incented to do. So that's probably like my shining moment there, from me personally bringing on somebody, and then I'd say overall with helping people. One of the other organizations I was at, I think I referred in a good 30 or 40 people over the course of the time I was there in a couple of years. And I think I got more than a dozen hired, or at least had influence on that. And I say influence, not influence onto the company, but not just, hey, here's some people I found or some people I know and we should hire them, but also talking to those people and being like, you need to come work here. This is a place you want to be. And so kind of, having that feather in my hat was a lot of fun too.
That's a really good hit rate. You'd be a good recruiter.
Yeah, but then I'd probably get caught up in all the recruiting stuff and I'd forget all the security stuff and then I'd suck at it. So
yeah, that's fair. Actually, that's something I've heard some of the hiring managers I know complain about is, hey, I'm supposed to be doing the security work. Why am I doing all the recruiting too? Either I'm filtering all the job applications on LinkedIn, or I'm doing the initial screens with people. I'm having to filter through hundreds or thousands of resumes for the SOC analyst role. That shouldn't be happening. There should be that recruiter layer to take all of that off your plate. So having a good enough recruiter and HR team to be able to trust them to do that without filtering out people that would otherwise be fits, that's kind of key. And it's kind of a challenge, I think, because a lot of HR and recruiters aren't necessarily security specific. They don't necessarily have the in-depth industry knowledge that you would like, or understanding of the technologies. It's just hard for them to screen people. So have you interacted with HR and recruiters, and how has that, relationship been, and how did you make sure that they were kind of, I guess, on task, or,
right,
filtering the right people?
And what you just said is another reason we kind of have this gap. Especially for organizations, standard, what would be a client to me, right? Not a consulting or services organization. You need to hire security staff, and your HR talent acquisition teams probably hire everything. They hire accountants, they hire people for facilities, and now they need to do so. They need to have an understanding of what that security role is and what those skill sets are. And then the other gap comes between them and the hiring manager. Like, even I think there are a lot of people who get into management and don't realize that you actually, part of your job is to manage things. You become a technical expert, and then you get into this role, and it's like, yeah, you're going to spend more time in meetings because your job is no longer pushing the buttons. It's making sure your team can push the buttons, right? So, and part of that is knowing what your team does and being able to write a good job description, being able to communicate that to the talent acquisition team, being able, one of the things I saw in some, I've actually done some like HR interview training, if the recruiter comes back or if you conduct an interview and you say, no, I don't want to hire that person, give the recruiter a reason. I hear too often that there's no reason. Is, oh, it just wasn't a good fit, or he didn't do that, or whatever. And like, you've got to give feedback to the recruiters. I think that's the big problem is, one, the talent acquisition needs to understand what they're recruiting for. And two, that hiring manager they're working with, they need to be communicating a lot. So for me personally, I'm close with our HR teams and everywhere I've ever kind of worked at, trying to make sure that message gets sort of filtered out. I've been lucky working in consulting and managed services. We're typically a security company, so we have the right type of talent acquisition. But even then, I mean, take the organizations listening here can take this. We have recruiters like you who know exactly what to do and what's going on and how to find the right people. And it still takes a long time to fill the gap, to find the people, right?
Yeah, all depends on the role for sure. So I think kind of a takeaway for me there is constant communication with your recruiting team, especially if it's an important role, is so crucial, and giving them feedback. Because if you don't know what's wrong as a recruiter, why your people keep getting rejected, you have no idea how to change course. It's been many times where I thought the person looked perfect on paper, and they haven't even been in the interview yet, and they had an awesome personality, but they weren't, the hiring manager wasn't giving them a shot. I just couldn't understand why. And they wouldn't respond to an email just to let me know. And so then, I was pretty much forced to either stop working on the search because I wasn't getting feedback and I didn't feel like I could place somebody, or just keep throwing people against the wall and trying to see what stuck. And that's just not a good way to do it. And if you think about it, you're wasting a lot of time, even just looking through emails at a bunch of resumes that aren't fits. You're wasting time on people that just aren't fits. Whereas if you spent 20 minutes to talk to the recruiter and say, hey, these people weren't fits, and here's exactly why. Could be intangibles, could be, technology stack, could be, something that they could be screening for. If you can give them the exact questions to ask people and the response that you're looking for,
yes.
Your hit rate's going to go way through the roof. Let them do a lot of the legwork of screening people out that aren't fits, and make sure they know who is and who isn't, and a fit and why.
Yeah, it's not just the question, but what's the answer you want to hear back, right?
Yeah. And I've actually worked with some companies in the DFIR space where they would have people do like a questionnaire, and they had answers to the questionnaire, and us recruiters, we would have to kind of review the questionnaires and make sure that everything was on point. That's kind of not a best practice in my opinion, because I think if people are in demand, they're going to take the path of least resistance most of the time and go to the companies that aren't making them jump through hoops. So that's just another little tip I would say. If you're looking to hire people and it's a challenging position to fill, try and remove the barriers to entry as best you can. Keep the interview rounds to 2 or 3 rounds. Don't start stacking up 4, 6, 8 interviews. People just don't put up with it when they have a bunch of different options. And if you can't make a decision based off of 2 or 3 interviews, then you probably need to get somebody else interviewing the people, or figure out why you're having such a difficult time making that decision. It's an important decision, and obviously you want people to stick around and want to be, making the right choices and asking the right questions up front during your interview process. But it's really important to be very thoughtful about the questions you're asking in those interviews. Maybe don't ask just the standard ones, strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that, because people are going to have answers for those, and they may be very well rehearsed, but they may not be honest. So, asking tough questions of people when they're going through the process, behavioral based stuff, situation, based questions like you were mentioning. Those are super good just to get
not having the same question asked by 7 different people, right, in an interview. That doesn't, and I'm a big advocate everywhere I've been of anybody doing interviewing needs to be trained on how to do an interview, because it's not enough to like look at the resume 10 seconds before you go in the interview and ask a bunch, again, the same random questions. And some HR organizations are fairly antiquated, and they're like, here's the 30 questions you need to ask them about the size of a manhole cover and all of this stuff, and it doesn't tell you anything, right? So that's what, in my experience, that's why you have so many of those interviews, is because nobody's comfortable enough to make a decision, because they actually don't know, like, they don't get a read from the individual because they have no idea, because they weren't prepped too, right? And then there's other sort of non-tangibles there. Well, yeah, I guess it's non-tangibles, the way to say it. Some people need to be aware of their biases, and they need to understand things like inclusion and diversity as well too, because some people may just not be great at identifying when that's happening to them. We all kind of do it every now and then. And so that's, again, another thing when you come into, if you want to get a good talent pool and you want to be able to recruit the best people and staff the best people, you need to have those individuals who are doing not just the hiring decision making, but that interview process as trained as possible.
Yep. And being very thoughtful about everything that you do within the interview process. And once you have people on board as well, onboarding continues the recruiting process. Making sure that you're cutting out waste, making sure the processes are smooth, making sure that technology works, making sure that recruiters are getting back to people in a timely manner. That's so crucial. And I think a lot of recruiting teams drop the ball because they're so busy and they're overwhelmed, and maybe their managers focus on certain metrics that drive certain behaviors. Like, don't get me started on email blasts and stuff like that, posting. I think all those things happen because of bad recruiting management that are focusing too much on metrics and not enough on candidate experience. And both the recruiting team as well as the hiring team can be focused on candidate experience. Being prepared for the interviews is a great way for hiring teams to show that they actually care, which is going to improve your offer acceptance rates by leaps and bounds. Just knowing that the hiring manager was prepared. They didn't, they weren't looking down at their phone. They asked intelligent questions. They actually seemed like they really wanted to get to know the person versus just asking what's your greatest strengths and weaknesses.
Actually read the resume.
Yeah, read the resume. Which, I've talked about it before, but recruiters only spend 5 to 10 seconds on a resume. That's for a purpose. It's because we go through hundreds or thousands of resumes at a time. Ideally, the hiring manager takes a little bit more of a deeper dive in there, and they can come up with some really good sort of deeper questions based on the resume. But I think a lot of people don't realize how much recruiting is a volume game. It's so much volume. And people that aren't in it just really don't know. So to all the hiring managers out there, we're going through hundreds or thousands of resumes a day. We get very good at being able to identify the right people very quickly, just at a glance. But it takes a long time to develop that specialty and that expertise, especially within a given field like security. There's just so much to know, so many intangibles and relationships, and the way one term is related to another term.
Yeah.
I've trained multiple recruiters now, and it just takes such a long time to develop a specialty in a recruiter, much less make them a good recruiter overall. So I guess I say all that to say, be patient with your recruiters.
For sure.
Try to educate them as best you can, but it does take a lot of time to get really, really good at something in recruiting. Well, cool. I guess just one last question here for you, Will, and I think we got to wrap up. So is there something within the security field, especially as it relates to hiring, that we're not talking about as an industry, but we should be?
I think you kind of hit on bad recruiters. And that goes with sort of third-party recruiters as well as internal recruiters. Early on in my career, and anybody in my industry gets this, probably in all the industries, actually, you get those LinkedIn messages that are completely irrelevant to you. right? I've got 23 years of experience, 24 years of experience, and I'll get an email for a systems analyst role, requiring like 3 years of experience and stuff. And I think those of us like you and I, we're talking about it and banging the drum and saying, don't do this. It's not the right way to do it. But I think those who are doing it aren't listening. So we're kind of just screaming at the clouds, the old Abe Simpson thing. And I feel bad because there's a lot of individuals. One of the recruiters I work with today, she said she loves being in recruitment because it's so easy to seem really good at your job because the bar is so low. And so that's not an insult to your profession, but because there are so many of those individuals out there doing the wrong things, and there's entire companies, there's whole recruitment firms who are teaching kids right out of school, this is how you do it, right? You just shotgun blast everybody with the same thing. No personalization. It's just, and the same thing happens in training salespeople too, right? Doing it the wrong way. So I think that's something we should talk about, because if we want to fix the talent gap in the industry, the bridge between the hiring manager and that individual looking for a job is that recruiter somewhere, and we need better recruiters. There's only so many Pete's out there, right? I think that's something we're not necessarily talking. I mean, we're all talking about how bad they are, but I don't think anybody's actually putting in a plan to fix it.
Yeah, holding recruiters accountable, and not just that, but figuring out how to get them to the point where they need to be. I worked at a huge corporate staffing firm to start my recruiting career, and we did email blasts and all that stuff, and it always rang hollow or bad to me. It just seemed like such a bad practice, and we'd get people emailing us back pissed off all the time, and that's not how I like to approach people. I'd prefer to make a really good impression and serve as an expert and have people trust me and enjoy the interaction and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. The barriers to entry are super low in the recruiting field. And I think, the onus is somewhat on the hiring managers and the good recruiters to hold people to account and to teach them the right way, for sure. So yeah, that's a great point. Well, appreciate you being on, Will. Great having you, and hope to do this again.
Yeah, it was great to be here, man. I'm always happy to talk to anybody who will listen.
Awesome. Thanks, Will.
See you later.